Hello and welcome. Today we are diving into a Supreme Court case that's, get this, 140 years old. And I know what you're thinking. That sounds pretty dry. But trust me, this story is absolutely packed with family drama, a fortune in land, and a legal principle that still affects divorce law every single day. It all comes down to this one really critical question. If a court in, say, California grants you a divorce, can that piece of paper automatically give you legal title to a valuable piece of property just over the border in Oregon? It seems like it should be simple, but the answer created a legal earthquake. So, to really understand the law here, we have to get to know the people involved. And right at the heart of this entire legal saga is a woman named Mary Barrett. Okay, so the timing here is absolutely crucial. Mary files for divorce way back in 1866, but then look what happens 2 years later. While the case is still going on, her husband, Charles, transfers his prime Portland real estate over to their daughter. And he does this for no money, which, as you can imagine, Mary would later argue was a totally shady move to keep the property away from her. The divorce itself doesn't even get finalized until 1870. So, after the divorce is final, Mary finds out about this Portland land, and she believes that a specific Oregon law, Section 495 of their code, if you want to get technical, gave the person who won a divorce the right to 1/3 of the other spouse's real estate. So what does she do? She sues her own daughter to get what she believes is her share. And this is where things get really sticky. Mary's lawsuit sets up this classic legal showdown. You've got a California court order on one side, and Oregon's very specific property laws on the other. The conflict itself was simple, but the implications were huge. I mean, nobody was arguing that the California court couldn't legally end the marriage. That was a done deal. But the land itself, that was in Oregon. And Oregon's law was pretty darn specific about giving a 1/3 chunk of property to the winner in a divorce. So here it is, the million-dollar question. Does a California court's authority actually stretch across the border to directly change the title of land in Oregon? Can one state's family court reach into another state and command its real estate? This question was so fundamental that it had to go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, let's get into the Supreme Court's big decision in Barrett v. Failing from 1884. This ruling wasn't just about Mary's property, it was really about drawing a line in the sand and defining the limits of a state's power. The court's decision really hinged on this very old, very powerful legal doctrine called lex re site. It sounds fancy, I know, but the idea is actually incredibly simple. When it comes to real estate, local law is king. The laws of Oregon are what matter for Oregon land, period. The court also made another really key distinction. They said a divorce decree is an in personam judgment. That means it acts on a person. It could order Charles Barrett, the person, to pay alimony or even order him to sign a deed over to Mary. But it is not an in rem judgment. It can't act directly on the thing, the property itself, in another state to automatically change who owns it. And this right here was the final nail in the coffin for Mary's case. Justice Gray, who wrote the opinion for the court, basically said, look, the Oregon legislature only ever meant for its property law to apply to divorces handed down by Oregon courts. Since Mary's decree was from California, it just didn't count. She lost her claim to the land. Now, this might all seem like ancient history, but the principles from this one case are very, very much alive and well. In a world where people move around and own property in different states all the time, its impact is felt every single day. You see, Barrett v. Failing helped build this idea that lawyers now call the divisible divorce. It means exactly what it sounds like. A court can legally cut the marital bond, the status of being married, but it might not have the jurisdiction to divide property that's sitting in another state. The divorce gets split or divided into two legal parts. So what does this mean for people today? Well, because of this case, if you get divorced in New York, but you own a vacation home down in Florida, your lawyer has to take extra steps. They have to file something called an ancillary proceeding in Florida. Basically, they're just asking the Florida court to honor and enforce what the New York court ordered about the property. It's a direct result of this 1884 ruling. But hold on, the story doesn't end there, not even close. What happened to the daughter Zarifa Failing and that valuable chunk of Portland land that started this whole mess? Its most dramatic chapter was actually still to come. So Zarifa held on to that property for her entire life. And when she died in 1917, her estate, with that very same land at its core, was worth a jaw-dropping $500,000. I mean, for that time, that was an absolutely immense fortune. What came next was one of the most sensational will battles in Oregon's history. It was straight out of a movie. The executors show up with a 1915 will that leaves the fortune to them. But then, during this massive 82-day trial, a much earlier will from 1911 is suddenly discovered, and that one left almost everything to a local children's home. In the end, the Oregon Supreme Court declared the executor's will was a fraud, and the charity won the fortune.
But there was one last incredible twist. The very lawyers who won the case for the children's home turned right around and tried to claim a fee of over $150,000. That's a third of the entire estate. Well, the court was not impressed. They called the request inequitable and gave them a much more reasonable fee of $21,000 instead. So think about this whole journey. We start with a cross-border divorce, which leads to a landmark Supreme Court case, which then spirals into a massive inheritance battle filled with fraud and courtroom drama. It just goes to show you how a single piece of land can create legal ripples that last for generations.
All right, so to boil it all down, the key takeaways from this whole saga are pretty clear. Number 1, local law governs local land. That's lex re setae. Number 2, a divorce can be divisible. You can separate the marital status from the property division. And number 3, because of all this, you often need extra legal steps in other states to make a divorce decree stick.
The story of Mary Barrett and the falling fortune is just a fascinating reminder that these invisible state lines create very real legal borders. And these borders shape everything from who gets the house in a divorce to who inherits a multi-million-dollar estate. It really proves that the law of the land is, well, quite literally, the law of the land.